Ah, Las Vegas, the home of American commercialism and that gold-toothed homeless man that pisses on pigeons. But Las Vegas has actually become a mecca of auto racing on the West Coast. The top 3 series of NASCAR still race there twice a year. NHRA runs their annual 4-wide nationals along with IndyCar races being held there in the past. But most people will have no idea that, for a brief time, Formula One raced in the gambling capital of the world. This is the untold story of the Caesars Palace Grand Prix. To start, we need to go back to August 1970, and Party Homes, a residential building company, acquires the Stardust International Raceway and other nearby properties. Just a year later, the track would be closed and demolished shortly thereafter. The grounds of the former racetrack are now residential buildings in a neighborhood called Spring Valley. While the track was gone, it was soon replaced by the Las Vegas Speedrome, a goofy name and a goofy track layout. Although the motor racing itch was slightly scratched, it wasn't fully relieved. Replacing a 3-mile, 13-turn racetrack with a 1.8-mile lumpy beam is not going to get people on your side. Las Vegas race fans wanted a road course, and by 1980, they would get it from an unlikely source. After Formula One left Watkins Glen, Bernie Ecclestone made a push to race in Vegas. A racetrack was laid out across the parking lot of the Caesars Palace Hotel. Yeah, coming from Bernie, I can understand why this is a thing. With all due respect to the man, the cheese fell off of his cracker a long time ago. The race was planned in 1981 as the last race of the 1981 F1 season. Everything seemed great, having the chance to run a championship decider in Vegas. However, there would be issues. First off, the track. Sesame Street is brought to you by the depressed letter E. Now, while I do understand they didn't have much to work with, it looks like they didn't even try with this track. Drivers were critical of the track, and I can't blame them. It's just hairpin kink, hairpin kink, hairpin kink, hairpin kink, hairpin kink, 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 90-degree corner. There's so many kinks, it deserves a 50 Shades of Grey parody. There was also sand runoff, which is certainly a great idea, except for the complex weather concept called wind. Blow me! The drivers didn't like the track, and by race day on October 17th, nearly 10 years after the last major racing event in Vegas, it was made clear that the fans didn't approve of this track either. Carlos Reutemann would grab the pole for the race, while his other championship rivals, Nelson Piquet and Jacques Lafitte, would be 4th and 12th respectively. Meanwhile, Giuseppe Gabani would qualify nearly 9 seconds slower in his Osella. Fun fact time, Osella named their 1988 car the FA1L, or the Fail. The entire population of Portal, North Dakota would show up to the track on a beautiful 75-degree day. On the start, Alan Jones would jump to the lead and lead every single lap and win by a gap so large it makes the gap between Michael Strahan's teeth seem comically small. Meanwhile, Nelson Piquet would get the title. If you enjoy watching camera director Where's Waldo and are a sadomasochist that enjoys a painful experience, then I would recommend watching this race. Just looking at the racing reference page, I was yawning. This is probably the worst race I've ever seen, because at least the 2015 Grand Prix in New Orleans had chaos. There was nothing to this. It's a bowl of plain noodles. I'd rather watch pink paint dry on a pink wall in black and white than watch this race for any considerable amount of time. And if you can believe it, the 1982 race is even worse. Prepare to go through the 5 stages of grief, except for the first and third one, so just anger, depression, and acceptance. There are 3 things you need to know about this race. 98 degrees, 18-mile-an-hour wind, Eddie Cheever podium. In that order, ascending order. These are all the ingredients for a CIA experiment gone wrong. Alan Prost would grab the pole for the race, while the main championship contender, Keke Rosberg, would start 6th. Entering race day, there would be a lot of storylines. How would Mario Andretti do in his last race? Would the heat ruin the race? And more importantly, who would be the champion for 1982. Pole sitter Alan Prost would lead until lap 2 when Rennie Arnoux would take the lead. They would once again swap the lead on lap 15. Later into the race, Prost would fade and Mikelio Alboreto would take the lead and bring home a win by 27 seconds. Meanwhile, farther in the back, Keke Rosberg would do everything he needed to do to win the championship. Unfortunately, in his last race, Mario Andretti would retire with a suspension issue. Reliability issues would plague this track from the first race in 1981. This montage should help demonstrate this. Over the 2 Grand Prix races held at the track, there would be a combined 23 retirements. To put that into context, if you counted every retirement in the Monaco Grand Prix, you would have to go back to 2014 to equal that. 5 races at Monaco had the same amount of retirements than 2 races at Caesars Palace. This race also featured drivers so far back they weren't even classified. Manfred Winkelhock was 13 laps down by the end of the 82 race. Alessio Salazar was 14 laps down in 1981. The 1982 winner, Mikelio Alboreto, blew his engine 8 laps before the end and still finished ahead of Salazar. A driver who saw the checkered flag finished behind a guy who didn't. This clip summarizes this race pretty well. The drivers were also getting beat around and had horrible neck pain to the point where the drivers christened it the Las Vegas neck. Hey, in both the Caesars Palace Grand Prix and the Gary Wells Caesars Palace jump, both involved spinal injuries and both happened in the early 80s. Funny that. If I haven't made it crystal clear already, F1 didn't return to Caesars Palace for 1983. While F1 was gone, kart and Trans Am raced here for 1983 and 1984. The track was a simplified 5-turn road course, coining the term almost oval before the 2020 Sakir Grand Prix made it cool. The race would be called by Paul Page and the late Bobby Unser, God rest his soul, with Bruce Jenner as a pit reporter. Besides that, these 2 kart races were pretty uninteresting, with Mario Andretti and Tom Sneva winning the 83 and 84 races. Can-Am would be the only series to feature a repeat winner, that being Danny Sullivan, but with poor showing from the racing and the attendance figures, anuses would begin to pucker. By 1985, racing would leave the track. The track would not be used for anything, and starting in 1987, the southern half of the track was gone, and by the next year, the northern half was torn up as well. When 1990 rolled around, no remains of the track were left. Fans nowadays talk about this race, but only as the butt of a historical joke. They decree this race as being one of the worst ever held, and the track as one of the worst ever. While I personally believe this is one of the worst tracks in F1 history, current tracks like the Sochi Autodrome, Yas Marina Circuit, and for 2022, the Miami Street Circuit, draw a lot of comparisons with Caesars Palace. Honestly, you can find more parallels between Caesars Palace and Yas Marina than most other tracks. Both are held in the middle of big cities. The track's main feature is a hotel near the track. They held the finale of a season, and what made the race so unpopular was the boring racing and awful track layout. Maybe if F1 tried this track today, they would like it a lot more. It didn't survive the 80s because the FIA wanted good racing. But is that the case nowadays? Surround the track with modern architecture and asphalt runoff, and F1 would probably race there. So despite the track being run 40 years ago with completely different cars and completely different drivers, maybe we can find modern F1 DNA in this track, near a hotel, buried under a water park, surrounded by sand dunes. This was the untold story of the Caesars Palace Grand Prix.